Hi, welcome to 2020 Tasty Treats with GourmetQuilter. Having a lot of fun with our projects this year. We're doing 20 foundation piece blocks at the moment. So that's these blocks here. There's more information on the website GourmetQuilter.com that tells you all about it. So we're doing one block a day for 20 days. There's 20 blocks. We've already done 3 foundation piece blocks and today we're doing block 4 and it's like a little bag. This one is made in 2 segments. And so I'm just going to run through how we put that block together. So if you've already signed up with GourmetQuilter, you'll have a pattern like this that you can print out. Other than that, let's get on with this, making this bag. So I've already cut my pieces of fabric out, and so I'm going to work on the bag segment at the moment, which is the lower half of the block. And I've already decided on my colours. I've decided that we need a nice purple bag, so we're having a lighter coloured flap, so I'm going to place that behind so that it's all covered in there, and I'm going to pin that in place. So that's piece number 1. Now remember, we're using a smaller stitch on our sewing machine so that things hold together nicely and it perforates the paper nicely. And then my pieces are probably a touch large for this, but I thought it was better to be too large than too small. So piece 2 is just a small triangle in here, so we need to position that so that we can see more or less where that seam's going to go, and then I can stitch that. So these are all these funny angled seams again, so we just have to keep a little bit of an eye out that pieces are going to fit properly. This one was fairly straightforward because it's just a little triangle that's going to flip down. So we've done the stitching, we're going to fold the paper out of the way, we're going to trim our seam, and then we can press the fabric piece. I'm just going to take the pin out. Pins don't iron so well, I found. So that's looking pretty good so far. Then I'm going to put the next piece on, which is number 3. So that's another piece going on here. So we just want to make sure that that's going to flip down all these pieces. So what I've done really is just make a large enough piece so that when I stitch that seam, I know it's going to be big enough to come down because of the angles. And so I'm positioning the piece on an angle, near enough, similar to what is shown there for the seam. You might find that you can see that through your light source, which will help a lot as well, but because I'm working with quite dark colours, it doesn't show through so well. Just remember when you're stitching to go past the line 2 or 3 stitches so that it's well into the seam area. Now we're going to just pull that bit of stitching that we've done from the paper and trim a seam. Oops. And fold that down. And I'm just going to press that. So we've done 3 pieces already. We're doing pretty well with this. So now we've got to come out on one of these longer side pieces. So I've got a couple of larger pieces here to do that with. So I'm just going to position that over this line here. I want it coming just out the top just a little bit. So even though these are funny angles, these are not great big pieces, so the chances are it's all going to sit quite well for you because you can see well enough that your pieces are large enough. So I think this is all fairly straightforward. I might just keep going, sewing my pieces on. So I've just sewn this one on, then I've got to do this one, and then we're going to pop some little side pieces of background on and the corners around the bottom. So I'll come back and show you when I'm ready to do the corners. So I've gone ahead and I've done my patching so far, but I haven't put my corners on yet. So we've got these background pieces on here, but we just need the corner. So I'm just using a square for my corner, and I'm just going to place it behind so that I know that it's covering behind the seam there, and I'm pretty sure, because I know that it's beyond the seam allowance, that it's going to be absolutely fine when I stitch along that line. So, and then we can trim that off afterwards. So, but remember, when you're doing that, it's not just making sure this half is right, it's making sure this half is right. So just err on the side of that being the larger half that you're sewing behind, so that when it flips over it will fit for you. So I'm not sure if you can see, but I've sewn, it's not halfway, it's slightly nearer that point, because this is the bit that's coming over that we want to be more generous. So then I can just trim away what I've done here. So the same thing, we fold back a corner, just pull apart any bits that have that we've sewn, so that I can just trim off that corner seam there. And then when we flip that corner down, oh, didn't trim the corner, folded it back. So that when we press that down, that is all going to be sitting just how we want it, so that there's plenty there when we come to trim the block up. It's well beyond that. So I've got another corner to go on here, so I might go ahead and just position that and stitch that on, and then we'll show you how to do some of the handle of the bag. It's not hard to do, but there's some quite skinny bits there, so we'll go through how we make that work. So I've gone ahead and started on the bag handle. So these skinny bits here, they're considerably wider at the moment, but they are quite small. So I'm just going to suggest that you trim the seams to a little bit less than 1/4 inch so that they fit. The strap is actually about, it's a good 1/4 inch wide, but just if you trim the seam slightly less, then it will fit within the next seam as well. You could leave it larger, but it just gets a little bit harder and more bulky on the seam lines. So I've done piece 2, 3 and 4, so we've got to put these little angled pieces on now to give that impression of the bag handle turning a corner there. So I need to position these in place, and my pieces again are quite generous, so that it's where it's a little bit harder to see, I can still stitch them in place. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this piece number 5 on at an angle. So just going past the lines each time so that things are taken in to the seam allowance. Snipping out these threads, I don't like these threads. So we've stitched that line there, and what we're going to do is pull back the paper as we have been, so that we can trim that off, and just trim it not quite as little as 1/8, a bit more than 1/8, but less than 1/4. Most of the rulers have those sort of markings on them, so you should be able to see that okay. And then I'm just going to press that, and I'll do the other one as well. So it just means taking a little bit of care with all these things, but I think if you just take your time, it's so much fun and you get such a good result. Who knew that patchwork could be so much fun? So just pulling that down so that I can fold my paper down, trim away less than 1/4 inch. And press it. So now we've just got to put the next pieces on, which again is just a narrow piece, because of making that shape. So the next piece that we're going to do is this top little triangle. So that's actually a piece of the background fabric. So I'm just going to stitch that across there. My little square is plenty big enough to flip up. So I'll pop that on, and then you start seeing how you get these narrow little shapes that almost look curved, but they're not. So just pull that back so that we can fold along that seam line. So you start to see that we're getting this nice narrow little handle, so we've got to do the sides next, and then we pop some corners on. Corners are very similar to how we did this one here, but I might go ahead and pop the sides on because you can kind of see how that goes, and then I'll come back and do the corners. So I've got my handle nearly done. I've just got to do my corners over here now. So we've got this nice thin strap happening. So I've got some squares here to do the corners, and I'm pretty sure that if I cut those in half, there's plenty there to do the seam and things, rather than having a great big square. So I'm going to cut these in half for my corners. I don't often cut specific shapes, but just sometimes it seems a huge amount of fabric otherwise, or we could have sewn it first and then cut it off, but I'm just going to go ahead and trust that there is enough. You probably can't see what I can see because I've got light coming in behind. I can actually see some of the fabric sitting there, so I know they're going to be okay. So I've sewn that triangle on. I'm going to trim that seam, but just before I do, I'll just make sure, and yes, there's plenty there. It's coming well out beyond the dashed line there around my edge, so I can just pull away any stitching that's there, fold back my corner and trim. It is best to know before you do it that it's going to fit rather than have to unpick and things. So it's definitely worth having a little double check sometimes with some of these pieces. So that's that corner all done. So that bag handle is starting to come together. There's just the other corner. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch that on. And then trim my handle. I've already trimmed the lower section of the bag, and then we can pop that block together and see it all finished. So exciting. So I've finished my handle. I'm pretty pleased with the way that's looking. It just kind of looks like a handle that's going to sit on that bag. So I've done the two segments. They just need to be joined together, so I might do that. We can see this bag completed. It's always nice to see the finished block. So just a very simple, straightforward joining this time, we hope. This bag handles should line up nicely with that bag. It's looking pretty good. I just need to press that seam. I'm going to press it open. I find that's the best way, and then all I'll have to do is take out those papers and I'll have another block. So do remember when we're making these blocks that the outside edges of the block are not necessarily on the straight grain, so they're not necessarily very stable. So you may, when you've taken the papers out, you might want to consider a light spray starch or something like that on it, just to give it a little bit of firmness if you're going to sew it into something else. So there's a fourth block. It's pretty exciting. We might put that one down here because then we can come along the top again. So that's 4 blocks done out of our 20. We're getting on really well. That's really good. So thank you so much, and please look at GourmetQuilter.com, or we'll see you back here for block 5.